My name is Gerald Tan, and at my sister's wedding reception, they introduced me to the head table as the family disappointment. While everyone laughed and clinked their champagne glasses, my brother-in-law Marcus stood up and announced to the entire ballroom, "Some people chase dreams, others just chase minimum wage jobs. Gerald here proves that not everyone can win in life." 300 guests erupted in laughter. What they didn't know was that I secretly owned 60% of the tech company that employed half the people in that room, including Marcus himself. But the real shock wasn't my hidden ownership. It was discovering that Marcus had been embezzling from my own company for 2 years, using my family's trust as his shield. By the time I walked into that emergency board meeting the following Monday, he had already sealed his own fate. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain was hammering against the windshield of my Honda Civic as I pulled into the circular driveway of the Grandview estate. Steam rose from the asphalt, mixing the scent of wet concrete with the perfume of expensive landscaping. I sat there for a moment, watching droplets race down the glass, knowing that once I stepped out of this car, there would be no turning back to the comfortable anonymity I had cultivated for the past 5 years. The valet approached with an umbrella, his crisp white shirt already showing signs of the humidity that clung to everything in Miami during wedding season. I handed him my keys, straightening the collar of my department store suit. It wasn't designer, but it was clean and pressed. That would have to be enough for tonight. Walking through the marble foyer of the venue, I could hear the gentle murmur of conversation floating from the main ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across walls lined with oil paintings of people I didn't recognize but who looked important enough to deserve golden frames. The air conditioning was working overtime, creating a stark contrast to the tropical heat outside. My sister Elena had outdone herself. White roses cascaded from every surface, intertwined with fairy lights that made the entire space look like something from a magazine. Round tables draped in ivory linens filled the room, each centerpiece more elaborate than anything I could have afforded when I was sleeping on air mattresses and eating ramen noodles 6 nights a week. I spotted my assigned table near the back, close enough to the family section to be included, but far enough away to avoid drawing attention. That was always my position in family gatherings, present but peripheral, invited but irrelevant. Elena glided past in her flowing gown, accepting congratulations and air kisses from guests whose names I had never bothered to learn. She caught sight of me and waved, her smile bright but brief. She had more important people to charm tonight, and we both understood that hierarchy without needing to discuss it. Marcus, her new husband, commanded attention near the bar. His laugh boomed across the room as he gestured animatedly to a group of men in expensive suits. They hung on his every word, nodding and chuckling at appropriate intervals. He had always possessed that magnetic quality that drew people into his orbit. It was the same charisma that had convinced my parents he was exactly the kind of man their daughter deserved. I found my seat and discovered the small placard that bore my name. Gerald Tan, it read in elegant script. But underneath, in smaller text that made my stomach drop, were the words "family disappointment." Someone had gone to the trouble of having custom name cards printed with what they considered my defining characteristic. The couple next to me noticed my reaction and exchanged glances. The woman, who introduced herself as Marcus's cousin from Orlando, leaned over with a sympathetic smile. "Oh, honey, that's terrible, but you know how weddings can bring out the worst in families. I'm sure they're just teasing." I nodded and forced a smile, slipping the nameplate into my jacket pocket. The weight of it pressed against my chest throughout the cocktail hour, a constant reminder of how my own family viewed my place in their lives. Dinner service began with a flourish of servers carrying silver-domed plates. The menu featured dishes with names I couldn't pronounce and prices I didn't want to imagine. My parents sat at the head table, beaming with pride as they watched Elena and Marcus hold court. My father wore his best suit, the one he reserved for church and special occasions. My mother had splurged on a new dress for the occasion, something navy blue with sparkles that caught the light when she moved. They looked happy, genuinely, radiantly happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. Elena had given them something to be proud of, something worth celebrating. She had married well, chosen a man with prospects and connections, someone who could provide the kind of life they had always hoped their children would achieve. I was not that someone. Between the salad course and the main entree, Marcus rose from his chair and tapped his knife against his wineglass. The gentle chiming echoed through the ballroom, gradually quieting the conversations, until all attention focused on him. He stood there for a moment, letting the anticipation build, clearly comfortable being the center of attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room without need for a microphone. "Before we continue with this incredible celebration, I want to talk about family." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Someone called out, "Hear, hear," from the back corner. "Family," Marcus continued, "is about more than just blood relations. It's about the people who show up, who contribute, who make a difference in each other's lives." He gestured toward my parents, who nodded approvingly. "Elena and I are surrounded tonight by people who have invested in our future, who believe in what we're building together." He paused, scanning the room with the practiced timing of someone accustomed to public speaking. His eyes found mine across the distance between our tables, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Of course," he said, his tone shifting slightly, "every family has different types of members. Some are achievers, some are supporters, and others serve as reminders of what happens when you don't quite live up to your potential." A few uncomfortable chuckles scattered through the audience. I could feel heads turning in my direction, though I kept my eyes fixed on the untouched plate in front of me. "Take my new brother-in-law, Gerald, here," Marcus continued, and now there was no mistaking his target. Gerald's been working the same entry-level job for, 5 years now? Still lives in that studio apartment, still drives that same car he had in college. The laughter was growing more confident now, fed by the alcohol and the crowd mentality that made cruelty feel like harmless fun. "But you know what? We need people like Gerald in our families. They keep the rest of us humble, remind us not to take our success for granted. Gerald shows us what happens when dreams stay dreams instead of becoming reality." The applause that followed felt like a physical assault. I watched my parents clapping along with everyone else, their faces showing embarrassment rather than anger at their son being publicly humiliated. They were embarrassed of me, not for me. Elena raised her glass, her smile never wavering. "To family," she said, "in all its wonderful variety." "To family," the room echoed back, 300 voices speaking in unison while I sat silent among them. I remained in my seat as the evening progressed, watching the dance floor fill with couples swaying to songs I didn't recognize. The DJ played a mix of contemporary hits and classic wedding standards, the kind of music designed to appeal to multiple generations without offending anyone. My phone buzzed against my leg, a text message from my assistant Sarah, who had no idea where I was or why I might need to be contacted on a Saturday evening. "Quarterly reports are ready for your review. Also, Marcus Chen from the Miami office requested a meeting Monday morning. Says it's urgent." Marcus Chen. The name stopped me cold. I read the message 3 times before the full implication hit me. My brother-in-law Marcus had married into my family using a slightly different version of his name. Marcus Chen was requesting a meeting with the CEO of Nexus Dynamics, the company where he works as a senior account manager. He had no idea that Gerald Tan, the family disappointment sitting 40 feet away from him, was the same person who signed his paychecks. I slipped away from the reception without saying goodbye to anyone. The rain had stopped, leaving the air thick and humid but refreshingly cool after the artificial chill of the air conditioning. My car was waiting where I had left it, looking modest and unremarkable next to the Audis and BMWs that filled the rest of the parking spaces. During the drive home, I thought about the 5 years that had led to this moment. 5 years of carefully constructed anonymity, of keeping my professional life completely separate from my family relationships. When I started Nexus Dynamics with my business partner Jennifer, we had agreed that staying under the radar would serve us better than seeking publicity. We focused on building solid client relationships and developing innovative software solutions while our competitors spent their energy on marketing and self-promotion. The strategy had worked beyond our wildest expectations. What began as a two-person operation working out of a shared office space had grown into a company employing over 400 people across 3 states. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Our client list included Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations that trusted us with their most sensitive data management needs. My family knew none of this. As far as they were concerned, I was still the same Gerald who had dropped out of his master's program to pursue what they considered a foolish entrepreneurial venture. They remembered the months when I couldn't afford to join them for dinner at nice restaurants, when I had to decline invitations to family vacations because I was investing every dollar back into the business. They saw the studio apartment and the old car, but they didn't see the deliberate choice to maintain a modest lifestyle while building something significant. They interpreted my frugality as failure rather than strategy, my absence from family events as shame rather than dedication to work that consumed 18 hours of every day. My apartment was exactly as I had left it that morning, small, clean, and efficient. The furniture was minimal but comfortable, chosen for function rather than impression. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph of Jennifer and me accepting an industry award the previous year. We both looked exhausted but genuinely happy, the way people look when they've accomplished something meaningful together. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened my laptop. The quarterly reports Sarah had mentioned were already in my inbox, along with dozens of other messages that had accumulated during the few hours I had been away. Numbers told stories, and the numbers in these reports told a story of continued growth and expanding market share. Nexus Dynamics was thriving. Our newest product launch had exceeded all projections, generating revenue streams that would secure the company's future for years to come. We had reached the point where success bred more success, where clients sought us out rather than requiring us to chase them. But there was something else in the reports that caught my attention. Irregularities in the Miami office accounts, discrepancies that had been flagged by our automated monitoring systems. Someone was moving money in ways that didn't align with standard procedures, creating a pattern that suggested deliberate deception rather than simple mistakes. I spent the next 2 hours digging deeper into the financial records, following digital trails that led to a conclusion I didn't want to accept. Marcus Chen had been systematically embezzling funds from client accounts, moving money through a series of shell companies that eventually led back to personal accounts under his control. The amounts weren't enormous by corporate standards, but they were substantial enough to represent a felony. More importantly, they demonstrated a level of planning and sophistication that indicated this wasn't an impulse decision or a moment of weakness. This was a carefully orchestrated theft that had been ongoing for nearly 2 years. My phone rang at 11:30, displaying Jennifer's number. She rarely called so late unless something urgent required immediate attention. "Gerald, are you looking at the Miami reports?" she asked without preamble. Jennifer had never been one for small talk, especially when business issues demanded focus. "Yes," I said, "I see the same patterns you're seeing." "This is bad, really bad. If this gets out before we can contain it, it could damage our reputation with every client we have. Financial services companies don't forgive security breaches, even when they're internal theft." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the situation settling over me like a heavy blanket. How much total exposure are we looking at? Around 400,000 over 24 months, plus whatever legal and reputation costs will incur when this becomes public. She paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Gerald, there's something else. The name on these accounts, Marcus Chen. Isn't that your sister's new husband?" The question hung between us for several seconds before I found my voice. "Yes, it is." This complicates things significantly. If we pursue this through normal channels, it becomes a very public family matter. If we don't pursue it, we're potentially liable for allowing known theft to continue. After we ended the call, I sat in the darkness of my apartment and considered my options. I could handle this quietly, allowing Marcus to resign and making arrangements for him to repay the stolen funds over time. That would protect my family from public embarrassment while preserving the company's reputation. Or I could let the situation play out according to standard corporate procedures, which would inevitably lead to criminal charges and media attention that would destroy both Marcus and Elena's new marriage. Neither option felt satisfactory, but I knew which one aligned with my responsibility to the company and to the other employees whose livelihoods depended on maintaining client trust. Sunday morning arrived gray and humid, with storm clouds building on the horizon. I drove to the office despite not being expected, needing the quiet environment to think through the implications of what I had discovered. The Nexus Dynamics building was a sleek glass structure in the heart of Miami's business district, designed to project competence and reliability without ostentation. Our logo was etched discreetly into the glass doors, visible but not demanding attention. We had always preferred to let our work speak for itself rather than relying on flashy marketing or aggressive self-promotion. My office occupied the top floor, with windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. On clear days, I could see all the way to the ocean, but today the view was obscured by clouds that promised afternoon thunderstorms. I spent the morning reviewing personnel files and corporate policies, preparing for the conversation I would need to have with Marcus on Monday. Company protocol required that suspected theft be reported to law enforcement immediately, but I wanted to give him an opportunity to explain himself before triggering an investigation that would ruin his life. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had publicly humiliated me less than 24 hours ago was now completely dependent on my discretion and mercy. He had unknowingly placed his future in the hands of the family disappointment he had mocked in front of 300 witnesses. Elena called around noon, her voice bright with post-wedding euphoria. "Gerald, thank you so much for coming last night. I know these big events aren't really your thing, but it meant a lot to me that you were there." "Of course," I said, not mentioning the nameplate or Marcus's speech. "It was a beautiful wedding." "Marcus feels terrible about his toast," she continued, and I could hear something careful in her tone. "You know how he gets when he's nervous. Sometimes he tries too hard to be funny and it comes out wrong." I let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. "Don't worry about it. He wants to take you to lunch this week, just the two of you. He thinks you guys got off on the wrong foot, and he'd like to start over." The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Elena chattering about honeymoon plans and thank you cards while I half listened and watched the storm clouds building outside my window. She had no idea that her new husband was about to face the most serious crisis of his professional life, and that her brother held the power to either save him or destroy him. After we hung up, I walked to the window and stood looking out at the city below. Miami stretched in all directions, a sprawling metropolis built on ambition and reinvention, where people came to escape their pasts and create new versions of themselves. I had done exactly that, transforming myself from the Gerald who couldn't afford dinner at nice restaurants into the Gerald who could buy the restaurant if he chose to. But I had kept that transformation secret, allowing my family to continue seeing me as the same person who had struggled and failed in their eyes. The question now was whether revealing the truth would serve any purpose beyond satisfying my wounded pride. Marcus would face consequences for his actions, regardless of whether my family knew about my role in his downfall. The company would survive and continue to prosper. My relationship with Elena would remain complicated, colored by years of misunderstanding and resentment. But there was something appealing about sitting across from Marcus in a conference room, watching his expression change as he realized exactly who he had been insulting at his own wedding reception. There was justice in allowing him to understand that the family disappointment he had mocked was the same person who controlled his professional fate. Monday morning arrived with the promised thunderstorms, turning the sky dark and sending sheets of rain across the city. I arrived at the office early, before most of the staff, and spent an hour reviewing the documentation that would be necessary for the meeting with Marcus. Sarah had scheduled him for 10 o'clock, listing the meeting purpose as quarterly performance review to avoid raising suspicions. She has no idea what was really about to happen, though she would certainly understand once the conversation began. I was sitting at my desk when she knocked on my doorframe at 9:45. "Mr. Chen is here for his appointment," she said. "Should I send him in?" "Give me 2 minutes, then yes." I stood and straightened my tie, checking my appearance in the reflection of the window. I looked professional but unremarkable, exactly the way I preferred to present myself in business situations. The power came from the position and the knowledge, not from intimidation or theatrics. Marcus entered the office with confident strides, his hand extended for a handshake before he had fully crossed the threshold. He was dressed in an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, his appearance polished and professional. "Mr. Tan, thank you for making time to meet with me," he said, his voice carrying the same charm that had captivated my family. "I've been looking forward to this opportunity to discuss some exciting developments in our client portfolio." He stopped mid-sentence when he got close enough to see my face clearly. The professional smile faltered, replaced by confusion and then growing recognition. I watched the color drain from his cheeks as the implications of the situation became clear to him. "Hello, Marcus," I said, quietly, gesturing toward the chair across from my desk. "Please, have a seat." We have quite a bit to discuss. The next few minutes unfolded in slow motion. Marcus sank into the chair, his earlier confidence evaporating as he struggled to process what was happening. I could see him trying to reconcile the Gerald he thought he knew with the Gerald sitting behind an executive desk in a corner office with his name on the door. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. You're the CEO?" "I am." I opened the folder on my desk and removed the financial reports that detailed his theft. "I'm also the person who's been reviewing some interesting patterns in the Miami office accounts." I watched his face as he scanned the documents, seeing the moment when he realized that his carefully constructed scheme had been discovered. His hands trembled slightly as he set the papers down, and when he looked up at me, his eyes held the same desperate quality I had seen in cornered animals. "Gerald, I can explain," he began, but I held up a hand to stop him. "You called me the family disappointment," I said, keeping my voice level and professional. "You told 300 people that I was a reminder of what happens when dreams don't become reality." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The magnitude of his situation was becoming clear to him, not just the professional consequences of his theft, but the personal humiliation of having publicly mocked the person who now held his future in his hands. "The theft," I continued, "amounts to just over $400,000 over 24 months. That's a federal crime, Marcus. It's also a violation of our company's ethics policies and a breach of the trust our clients place in us." "I'll pay it back," he said quickly, "every dollar, with interest. I made some bad investments, got in over my head, but I can fix this." I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. The arrogance and confidence from Saturday night had been completely replaced by panic and desperation. This was what Marcus looked like when he wasn't controlling the narrative, when he couldn't charm his way out of consequences. "You're going to resign," I said. "Today. You're going to sign a confession detailing exactly what you took and how you took it. You're going to cooperate fully with our financial recovery efforts and with any law enforcement investigation that may follow. And in return, I won't call the police until after you've had a chance to tell Elena what you've done. I'll give you that much consideration for her sake, not yours." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of rain against the windows and the distant hum of air conditioning. Marcus sat motionless, staring at the financial reports as if they might change if he looked at them long enough. "She doesn't know who you are either," he said finally. "Your own sister doesn't know you built this company." "No," I agreed. "She doesn't." "Are you going to tell her?" I considered the question carefully before answering. "That depends on what you tell her about why you're suddenly unemployed and facing criminal charges." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with Marcus alternating between attempts to negotiate and moments of resigned acceptance. In the end, he signed the resignation letter and confession that our legal department had prepared, his signature shaky but legally binding. After he left, I sat alone in my office and watched the storm continue outside. The rain was coming down in torrents now, turning the streets into rivers and sending pedestrians scrambling for shelter. My phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Marcus seems upset about something. Did you two have lunch today? He won't tell me what's wrong." I didn't respond immediately. Soon enough, she would know everything. Marcus would have to explain why he was suddenly unemployed, why federal investigators might be calling, why their new marriage was about to be tested by scandal and financial stress. But for now, in this moment, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't experienced in years. Not revenge exactly, but a sense of balance being restored. The family disappointment had just saved the family from a much worse disappointment, even if they would never know it. The story was far from over. There would be difficult conversations ahead, legal proceedings that would drag on for months, and family relationships that might never fully recover. But for the first time since Saturday night, I felt like Gerald Tan rather than the caricature my family had created. I picked up my phone and began typing a response to Elena's text, then stopped. Some conversations required more than messages exchanged through screens. Some truths needed to be spoken face to face with all the complexity and nuance that only human presence could convey. Outside, the storm was beginning to pass, leaving the air cleaner and the light brighter than it had been all day. I closed the folder on my desk and prepared to leave the office early. There was a family meeting that needed to happen, and for once in my life, I would be the one controlling the agenda. The drive to Elena's house took me through the parts of Miami I rarely visited anymore, neighborhoods where manicured lawns stretched between houses that cost more than most people earned in a decade. Spanish-style architecture dominated the landscape, all red tile roofs and pristine white stucco walls that reflected the afternoon sun like mirrors. Elena and Marcus lived in a gated community called Coral Estates, the kind of place where security guards knew your name and gardeners worked in shifts to maintain the illusion of effortless perfection. I had never asked how they afforded the mortgage on a house that large, but now I understood. Marcus had been supplementing his legitimate income with funds that belonged to my company and our clients. The guard at the entrance recognized me from the wedding and waved me through without requiring identification. I followed the winding road past artificial lakes and perfectly symmetrical palm trees until I reached their street. Their house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, larger than the others around it, with a circular driveway that could accommodate a dozen cars. Marcus's BMW was parked in the driveway, next to Elena's white Mercedes. Both vehicles were less than 2 years old, another detail that should have raised questions about their financial situation. I parked my Honda behind the BMW and sat for a moment, gathering my thoughts before walking to the front door. Elena answered on the second ring of the doorbell, her face lighting up with surprise and pleasure. She was wearing casual clothes, yoga pants and an oversized sweater, but somehow managed to look elegant even in loungewear. She had always possessed that quality, the ability to make everything around her seem more refined simply by her presence. "Gerald, what a wonderful surprise," she said, stepping aside to let me enter. "Marcus just got home from work, and he's had a difficult day." The interior of their house was exactly what I would have expected from Elena. Everything was coordinated and tasteful, from the cream-colored leather furniture to the abstract paintings that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases, and the hardwood floors gleamed under strategically placed lighting. Marcus appeared from what I assumed was his home office, still wearing his business suit but with his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled. When he saw me standing in his foyer, his face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical under different circumstances. Surprise, fear, anger, and resignation all flickered across his features before settling into a mask of forced civility. "Gerald," he said, extending his hand for a handshake that neither of us wanted. Elena looked between us, clearly sensing tension but not understanding its source. "I was just telling Gerald that you had a rough day at work. Maybe you two can talk while I make some coffee." "That would be perfect," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Marcus and I definitely need to talk." We settled in the living room, Marcus choosing the chair closest to the window, while I sat on the sofa facing him. Elena bustled around in the kitchen, the sounds of her coffee preparation providing a domestic soundtrack to what promised to be a very uncomfortable conversation. "She doesn't know yet," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely audible over the sounds from the kitchen. I figured she didn't, or you wouldn't have invited me to sit down. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for the first time since I had known him, Marcus looked genuinely vulnerable. The polished confidence that had always defined him was completely absent, replaced by the hollow-eyed desperation of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. "How long have you known?" he asked. "About the company, I mean. I founded it 6 years ago with a partner, so I've known about it for exactly as long as it's existed." He closed his eyes and rubbed his temples as if trying to massage a headache. "This is going to destroy everything. You destroyed everything when you decided to steal from us. I'm just the one who discovered it." Elena returned with a tray containing 3 cups of coffee and a small plate of cookies that looked like they had been purchased from an expensive bakery. She settled into the chair next to Marcus, curling her legs under herself in a gesture that reminded me of how she used to sit when we were children watching television together. "So," she said, clearly trying to lighten the mood, "what's this mysterious work situation that has my husband looking like someone stole his lunch money?" The irony of her word choice wasn't lost on either Marcus or me. He stared into his coffee cup as if it contained answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. I took a sip of my coffee, noting that Elena had remembered exactly how I liked it, despite not having seen me in months. "Elena," I said carefully, "there are some things about my life that I haven't shared with the family, things that are going to be difficult to explain." She tilted her head, studying my face with the intense focus she had always brought to puzzles and problems. "What kind of things?" "The company where Marcus works, Nexus Dynamics. I own it." The words hung in the air like smoke. Elena's expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to disbelief in the span of several seconds. She looked at Marcus, then back at me, then at Marcus again, as if expecting one of us to reveal that this was an elaborate joke. "That's not possible," she said finally. "You work at… what do you do again? Something with computers?" "I develop software and manage the company that employs your husband, along with about 400 other people across 3 states." Elena set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. The casual domestic atmosphere of moments before had evaporated, replaced by tension so thick it felt like a physical presence in the room. "I don't understand," she said, looking directly at Marcus. "Did you know about this?" Marcus finally raised his eyes from his coffee. "I found out today." "Found out how?" This was the moment I had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The moment when the careful fiction my family had constructed about my life would finally crumble, revealing the truth that none of them had bothered to discover. "Marcus has been stealing money from the company," I said. "Our automated monitoring systems flagged unusual transactions in his accounts. When I investigated, I discovered he had embezzled over $400,000 during the past 2 years. Elena's face went white. She stared at Marcus with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of betrayal and horror that made her look suddenly older. "Tell me that's not true," she whispered. Marcus was silent for several seconds before nodding slowly. "It's true." The sound Elena made was somewhere between a gasp and a sob. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and then back to her chair without sitting down. Her hands moved restlessly, touching her hair, her clothes, the back of the chair, as if she needed to anchor herself to something solid. "How much?" she asked. "Just over 400,000, I repeated. "How could you do this?" she said to Marcus, her voice rising. "How could you steal from Gerald's company? How could you steal from anyone?" "I didn't know it was Gerald's company," Marcus said defensively. "I thought I was just borrowing from some faceless corporation. I was going to pay it all back." Elena whirled to face him. "Borrowing? You were borrowing $400,000 without permission? That's called stealing, Marcus. That's called being a criminal." The conversation devolved into accusations and denials, with Elena demanding explanations that Marcus couldn't provide, and Marcus offering justifications that sounded increasingly desperate. I watched from the sofa, feeling like an observer at the dissolution of a marriage that had lasted less than 72 hours. Eventually, Elena turned her attention back to me. "Why didn't you tell us about the company? Why did you let us think you were unsuccessful?" I supplied. A disappointment? Someone who hadn't lived up to his potential? She had the grace to look ashamed. You let us believe things that weren't true. You never asked what I actually did for a living. You never showed any interest in my life beyond what you could see on the surface. You made assumptions based on my apartment and my car and the fact that I didn't talk about work at family gatherings. But you could have corrected us. When? During Marcus's toast at your wedding, when he was explaining to 300 people how I served as a reminder of what happens when dreams don't become reality? Or maybe during one of the family dinners where Dad would make jokes about my lack of ambition. Elena sank into her chair, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. I had no idea you felt that way. I stopped feeling much of anything about it, I said. I accepted that you all had decided who I was, and nothing I said was going to change your minds. Marcus had been silent during this exchange, but now he spoke up. What happens next? I looked at him for a long moment before answering. You resigned today. You signed a confession detailing exactly what you took and how you took it. Our legal department will work with you to arrange repayment, but that doesn't eliminate the criminal liability. Are you going to press charges? Elena asked. That's not entirely up to me. We have a responsibility to our clients and to our other employees. We can't simply ignore theft because the perpetrator happens to be married to my sister. But you could influence the decision. I considered her question carefully. I could. But should I? If any other employee had stolen $400,000, what do you think would happen to them? Elena didn't answer, but we all knew what the answer was. Any other employee would already be in handcuffs, facing federal charges and the destruction of their professional reputation. I need to understand something, I said to Marcus. The house, the cars, the lifestyle you've been living, how much of it was funded by money you stole from us? Marcus looked around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. Most of it, he admitted. My legitimate salary covered maybe half of our expenses. So everything Elena has been enjoying, everything she's been proud of, was built on stolen money? Elena made another one of those gasping sounds. I didn't know.
Gerald, you have to believe I didn't know. I do believe you, but that doesn't change the fact that you benefited from his crimes. The three of us sat in silence for several minutes, each lost in our own thoughts. Outside, I could hear the distant sound of lawnmowers and the occasional car passing on the street. Normal suburban sounds from a normal suburban afternoon, completely at odds with the crisis unfolding in this perfectly appointed living room. What do we tell Mom and Dad? Elena asked finally. We tell them the truth. They'll be devastated. The wedding, the pride they felt about Marcus, about the life I was building, was based on lies, I finished. They deserve to know the truth. Marcus stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the artificial lake that formed the centerpiece of their neighborhood. His shoulders were slumped in defeat, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, just a few thousand here and there to cover some bad investments. I thought I could replace it before anyone noticed. But you couldn't, I said. No. The hole kept getting deeper, and I kept taking more to try to fill it. I convinced myself it was temporary, that I'd figure out a way to make it right. Elena was crying openly now, not bothering to wipe away the tears that streamed down her face. How are we going to survive this? The house, the cars, my job. Everyone's going to know what you did. Your job? I asked. I work for a financial services company. When they find out my husband embezzled funds from his employer, they'll fire me immediately. It's a liability issue. I hadn't considered that Elena would face professional consequences for Marcus's actions, but she was right. Companies in the financial sector couldn't afford to employ people with any connection to financial crimes, even indirect ones. We'll lose everything, she continued. The house, the cars, our reputation, our friends, everything we built together. Everything you built on stolen money, I corrected gently. This isn't a tragedy, Elena. This is consequences. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching us fall apart? I considered her question honestly before answering. No, I'm not enjoying it, but I'm also not sorry it's happening. Because we hurt your feelings at the wedding? Because you've been treating me like a failure for years without ever bothering to learn who I actually am or what I've actually accomplished. Because you married a man who stole from my company and then mocked me for not living up to my potential. Marcus turned from the window. For what it's worth, I'm sorry about the wedding, about what I said. You're sorry because you got caught. If you hadn't been embezzling from my company, you'd still think I was a loser who deserved to be humiliated in public. That's not true, isn't it? When you were planning that toast, did you think about whether your words might hurt me? Did you consider that maybe you didn't know the whole story about my life? Marcus didn't answer, which was answer enough. Elena wiped her eyes with a tissue from the coffee table. What happens now? What do Marcus and I do? You figure out how to rebuild your lives without stolen money. You deal with the legal consequences of Marcus's actions. You explain to Mom and Dad why their new son-in-law is facing federal charges. And you? What do you do? I stood up, preparing to leave. I go back to running my company and trying to repair the damage Marcus caused to our reputation and our client relationships. Will you help us? Elena asked. With the legal situation, I mean. Your company has lawyers, connections. I'll make sure Marcus gets fair treatment through the legal process. I won't try to influence the outcome beyond that. That's it? After everything we've been through as a family? I paused at the front door. What we've been through as a family is years of you dismissing me as a failure while I quietly succeeded beyond anything you imagined. What we're going through now is finally dealing with the truth. The drive home gave me time to process what had just happened. I had revealed my success and Marcus's crimes in the same conversation, forever changing the dynamics of my relationship with Elena and with my parents. There would be no going back to the comfortable fiction that had defined our family interactions for years. My phone rang as I was pulling into my apartment complex. Jennifer's name appeared on the display, and I answered using the hands-free system. "How did it go?" she asked without preamble. "About as well as you'd expect. Elena is devastated, Marcus is resigned to his fate, and I feel like I've been hit by a truck. Any indication that she knew about the theft? No, she's genuinely shocked and horrified. Her primary concern right now is how this will affect her own career and their social standing. That's probably realistic. This kind of scandal tends to spread beyond the immediate perpetrator." I parked and sat in my car, not ready to go inside and be alone with my thoughts. "Jennifer, did we do the right thing? Pursuing this, I mean." "You mean instead of covering it up to protect your family?" "Yes. Gerald, we have 400 employees whose jobs depend on our company maintaining its reputation for integrity. We have clients who trust us with sensitive financial data. We can't compromise that trust to protect one person, even if that person is married to your sister." She was right, but that didn't make the situation any less painful. I had spent years building walls between my professional and personal lives, and now those walls were crumbling in ways I couldn't control. "There's something else," Jennifer continued. "I've been digging deeper into Marcus's activities, and I think there might be more we haven't discovered yet."
What kind of more? He had access to client information that could have been valuable to competitors. I want to bring in a forensic accounting firm to do a complete audit of everything he touched. The implications of her words settled over me like a cold fog. If Marcus had been selling client information in addition to embezzling funds, the damage to our company could be far more extensive than we had realized. "Do it," I said. "Whatever it costs, we need to know the full extent of what we're dealing with." After we hung up, I finally went inside and poured myself a glass of wine. My apartment felt smaller than usual, cramped and confining after the spacious luxury of Elena's house. But it was honest space, paid for with money I had earned rather than money I had stolen. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother. Elena called. She's very upset about something but won't tell me what's wrong. She asked me to call you. What's going on? I stared at the message for several minutes before typing a response. "I'll call you tomorrow. There's a lot to explain." "Is everyone okay?" Everyone is alive and healthy. Beyond that, it's complicated. I didn't receive another message, which meant my mother was probably calling Elena again, trying to extract more information from her obviously distraught daughter. By tomorrow, the whole story would have to come out. My parents would learn that their son-in-law was a criminal and that their son was a successful businessman they had never bothered to understand. The wine wasn't helping my mood, so I set it aside and opened my laptop. Work had always been my refuge when family relationships became too complicated to navigate. Numbers and code were logical and predictable in ways that human emotions could never be. I spent the evening reviewing the forensic audit proposal Jennifer had sent, trying to understand exactly what we would be looking for and how long the investigation might take. The scope was broader than I had anticipated, covering not just financial transactions, but also data access logs, email communications, and network activity patterns. If Marcus had been sharing confidential information with competitors, proving it would require examining thousands of files and communications. The process could take months and would likely uncover other problems we hadn't yet discovered. Around 10 o'clock, my phone rang again. This time it was Elena, her voice thick with tears and exhaustion. "Gerald, I need to ask you something." "All right?" "The money Marcus stole, the $400,000, is that going to bankrupt her company?" "No, it's a significant amount, but it won't bankrupt us." "Then why can't you just write it off, pretend it never happened?" I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. "Because it did happen. Because writing it off would be lying to our clients and our other employees. Because pretending crimes didn't occur doesn't make them go away." "But if the money doesn't matter to you?" "The money isn't the point, Elena. The breach of trust is the point. The fact that someone I hired violated our client's confidence is the point. Someone you hired who happens to be married to your sister. Someone I hired who stole from us regardless of who he's married to." She was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Mom and Dad are coming over tomorrow. I have to tell them everything." "Good. Will you be there?" I considered her request. Part of me wanted to witness my parents' reaction when they learned the truth about both Marcus and me. But a larger part of me dreaded the conversation and all the emotions it would unleash. "I don't think that's a good idea." "Please, Gerald, I can't do this alone." "You're not alone. Marcus will be there." "Marcus is part of the problem. I need someone from my family, someone who cares about me." "I do care about you, but I'm also the person Marcus stole from. My presence would just make the conversation more difficult." "For who? For them or for you?" The question stung because it forced me to acknowledge my own motivations. Was I avoiding the conversation to protect my parents from additional stress, or was I protecting myself from having to witness their disappointment and confusion? "For everyone involved," I said finally. "You're being a coward." The accusation hung between us, transmitted through fiber optic cables, but feeling as immediate as if she had been standing in the same room. Elena had always possessed the ability to cut straight to the heart of uncomfortable truths. Maybe I am. Our whole family is falling apart, and you're hiding in your apartment feeling sorry for yourself. I'm not feeling sorry for myself. I'm trying to figure out how to clean up the mess Marcus made of my company while dealing with the fact that my own family has spent years treating me like a failure. So you're going to punish all of us because your feelings got hurt? I took a deep breath, trying to control my temper. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm allowing natural consequences to occur. Natural consequences that you have the power to prevent? At what cost? To my integrity? To my responsibility to my employees and clients? To your family? What family, Elena? The family that never bothered to ask what I did for a living? The family that let Marcus mock me publicly without saying a word in my defense?
The family that assumed I was a failure without ever investigating whether their assumptions were correct? We're still your family. Are you? Because it feels like I'm just the person you call when you need something. The conversation ended shortly after that, with Elena hanging up in frustration and me staring at my phone, wondering how everything had become so complicated so quickly. 3 days ago, I had been a successful businessman with a distant but functional relationship with his family. Now I was the unwilling center of a scandal that threatened to destroy everyone I had grown up with. I went to bed that night knowing that tomorrow would bring more difficult conversations and more impossible choices. The forensic audit would begin, potentially uncovering additional crimes that would make Marcus's situation even worse. My parents would learn truths that would shatter their assumptions about both their children. Elena would have to rebuild her life from the ground up, starting with accepting that everything she thought she knew had been wrong. But for the first time in years, I felt like Gerald, rather than the caricature my family had created. The truth was painful and complicated, but it was finally out in the open where it could be dealt with honestly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.